It's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is meander. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear meander used is to mean to follow a winding course. So, generally, when this verb is being used, a river, a stream, something of that nature is being described, right? So, don't think straight line, but think of something kind of curving and winding. A second way you hear meander used is to mean to wander randomly. So here you're walking without a clear purpose, right? If you tell yourself, I'm going to walk to the coffee shop, right? That's not meandering. You have a purpose. You're going to take maybe the most direct route there. But if you're like, I'm just going to go out and walk around for a while, you could use that verb to describe that action. A third way you hear meander used is to mean to proceed aimlessly or with little purpose when you're speaking or writing. So maybe you've had a teacher, a professor, who has been kind of analyzing, critiquing some of your writing or perhaps a speech, right? And they tell you you're meandering, right? You're not really zeroing in on a purpose and speaking or writing towards that purpose, right? You seem like you have no purpose. You're just using a bunch of words. You should know that meander is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing to form meandering. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, meander, ends with a voiced R sound. So our past tense ending is going to make a D sound. It should sound like this: meandered, meandered. Okay. Now, there are a couple phrasal verbs you will hear with this particular verb. The meanings aren't all that different, but I still thought it was good for us to have a few examples. So you might encounter meander over. And again, as this verb is being used, we're talking about directing someone or something in many directions, in multiple directions, or maybe at multiple objects. So, an example of this might be his gaze meandered over the books on the shelves. Okay, so I wouldn't be using this verb if I meant that the person, the subject here, he is looking for a specific book, right? But if his eyes are just kind of right, glancing over, right? That would be a good verb to use here. So gaze is talking about kind of eyesight there. Another phrasal verb you might hear is to meander through. This can have a couple different meanings. One would be that to move without a fixed direction. So you're a bit aimless in your movement. An example of this might be you can't meander through college. You need to pick a major. Right. So I imagine there are a few students out there who've heard a statement like this from some parents, some concerned family members, right, who don't feel like they have that purpose or direction. They're taking one class in this college, maybe one over here, different departments, no clear direction. Okay. A second way you hear meander through is really, again, back to that initial meaning of following some kind of winding or course that's turning a lot. An example of this: the river meanders through 17 communities before it empties into the ocean. Okay, so there aren't, I don't think there are very many rivers out there, right, that move in a straight line, right? So we're talking about it winding and moving through 17 towns and cities before finally reaching the ocean. Now, let's continue using our verb of the day, meander, in a couple different verb tenses. Today, let's practice the simple past tense and the present perfect progressive. We'll start with the simple past tense. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that is completed at some known point in the past. Now, sometimes in these simple past tense sentences, we see words like yesterday or phrases like last year or maybe a specific time or a specific date. And those time signals are telling us this is completed and we know the time at which the action was completed. But not every sentence in the simple past tense is going to have a time signal. It could be implied as part of a conversation or as part of a longer text, a paragraph, if you will. Okay. The nice thing, though, about the simple past tense is that our structure is going to be the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative, I'm going to have my subject and then I'm going to use the ed form of my verb since this is a regular verb. You can see that in my example. Shoppers meandered through the street looking into shop windows. Okay, so what the sentence, I should say, what the sentence suggests to me, right? People are wandering a bit, looking at things. They're not walking around with like a clear purpose. I need to buy a sweater, right? And they're going to that particular shop, right? They're just kind of checking things out. Okay. Now, if I want to make a negative sentence in the simple past tense, I'm going to start with my subject, then I'm going to use did, not, and then the base verb. You might also hear the contraction didn't and then the base verb. But notice I'm not adding ed to the end of this verb. Here's another example. She didn't meander as she spoke. Okay, so here we're describing someone who is speaking with purpose, with a clear direction. Okay. Lastly, I can make a yes or no question in the simple past tense by starting with did, then I'll have my subject, and then the base verb. So again, in my yes or no question, I'm not using the ed form of the verb. I'm only using that ed form in the affirmative. Here's another example question. Did you meander out in the woods? Right? So here, kind of, again, just walk around, not walk from here to there, like with a set plan. Now, let's take a moment to look at present perfect progressive. We use this verb tense to describe an action that started in the past and it continues into the present. Many times we're using this verb tense to stress how long something has been happening. Okay. Now, some teachers and some books will call this the present perfect continuous. That's great. These two titles really mean the same thing. I like using present perfect progressive because I tell my students the 3 P's help me remember that I need 3 parts to form my verb in the affirmative. So I'm going to use a present form of have, so that could be have or has, right? Depends on what my subject is. Then I use the participle been, B-E-E-N, and then I use the ing form of the verb. Okay? So just a quick review. If my subject is I, you, we, or they, then I'll use have been and that ing. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use has been and that ing form. Now, let's take a look at an example sentence. The jet stream has been meandering further north than typical for this time of year, right? So I saw this sentence in a recent weather and climate change article, kind of talking about different weather patterns that might feel unusual or different for certain parts of the world. And so kind of that idea of it's moving without a clear purpose or direction. Now, if I want to make a negative present perfect progressive sentence, again, I'll start with my subject, and then based on what that subject is, I'll use have or has. Then I have not, then the participle been, then the ing form. Now, you might hear some people use contractions like haven't been in the ing form or hasn't been in the ing form. You can actually see that a bit in my example sentence here. Thankfully, the fires haven't been meandering. Okay. Saw a comment a bit similar to this, a forest firefighter, so someone who tries to control wild fires, was talking about a series of them and saying they were really following a more direct pattern or path. They weren't kind of wandering or following something unusual that might make them a little bit harder to find. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, we start with have or has, whatever matches our subject, and that subject comes next. Then we have the participle been, and then our ing form of the verb. Here's another example. Have the cows been meandering in the pasture? Okay. So again, you might use this verb with a lot of animals, right? They might not have a certain clear direction or clear purpose. They're just wandering or moving around. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb meander. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So, the noun form has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. Okay. So one way to use this noun meander is to refer to something that has a winding curve or a bend in it. So most commonly you're going to hear it with rivers or roads. So an example of this. This river has huge meanders. So something, maybe we're talking about a really big curving shape, a really big bend to it. A second way you hear the noun meander used is to refer to an aimless journey. So usually it's one that kind of takes you back to wherever you started. So you might think about kind of going in a circle, right? That would take you back to that central point. So an example of this, we had a lovely meander around the trail, right? So whomever is saying this particular sentence is thinking about, we just went out for a walk. Maybe we didn't have a clear purpose, right? We're trying to walk from point A to point B, just going to walk around a bit. Another related word that you might hear is meanderer. This extra er suffix is referring to a person who, and then we can go back to our root word, meanders. So, an example of this. My husband and I are farmers markets meanderers. Okay. I love going to farmers markets in the summer, but I get quite indecisive. I can't make a decision. So many times we don't end up buying things. We spend a lot of time walking around looking at things, but we don't always have a clear purpose, nor do we always come home with something. The last word we'll look at today is the adverb meanderingly. So here we might be describing an adjective or describing a verb with this particular adverb, and the action we're describing or the adjective we're describing is being done without clear-cut action or urgent action, right? So again, this goes back to the kind of no purpose. An example of this. This movie is meanderingly paced and will bore many to sleep. Saw a sentence very similar to this. We're viewing a movie, and as you can tell, the person writing the review was not a big fan. They didn't enjoy it, right? So they thought the movie kind of goes off in this direction and like, why are they telling us this, right? And it comes back to something else, and they found it quite boring. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.